I'd like to make a little apology in advance. I'm still feeling a little under the weather, so apologies if I sound like Ben Shapiro. It would appear that despite having several videos about Europe somewhat recently, I haven't been in what is considered the west of Europe since my first video, Norway. And I haven't done a video centered around a nation's capital since Ashgabat in Turkmenistan, so we're going to take this opportunity to do that again as well. What better place to start with besides London, a place that if you've never heard of, you've probably been living under a rock. And like before, I'm going to structure this around the physical geography and its location, then the history, and then of course all the things that can be found there. Let's get at it. So, London would be the capital of the United Kingdom, which is found in what's considered northwestern Europe, being an island nation that consists of England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. That makes Ireland its only true bordering nature, and it sits within the northern part of the Atlantic Ocean, as well as the Northern Sea. You'll find London in the southeastern part of the Great Britain island found within England, and it has a population of about 9.75 million people. And much like most huge metropolitan cities like this, it doesn't fall within any county. However, there is London and Greater London. Most people, when they just say London, they're referring to the specifically downtown London, which is only about 1.12 miles squared, and of course that's the historical and financial core. Greater London, however, covers about 32 different boroughs, which comes out to like 600 square miles. And you'll find some attractions here as well as a few government buildings, and most of this is going to be neighborhoods. And really, London as a whole acts as the entire administrative district. The counties that surround that are Berkshire, Buckinghamshire, Hertfordshire, Essex, Kent, and Surrey. A lot of shires, huh? And if you zoom out here a little bit, you can see just how massive London is within this otherwise surrounding sea of green. In terms of physical geographical location, it falls in what is known as the London Basin, with a very low altitude at only about 35 meters above sea level. Much of this is found above a block of Paleozoic rocks that makes up the London platform, with vertical movement of this block affecting a lot of the land structures. Moreover, the landscape sits on a bed of white chalk, a very soft limestone, and a layer of green sand, which is a thick layer of waterproof galled clay. Of course, its main geographical feature would be the Thames River, essentially cutting right through the entire capital. It's about 346 kilometers long, being the longest river in England and the second in all of UK. The Thames River rises in what is known as Cotswold Hills, running through 9 different counties, with the source being at the Thames Head, which is about 108 meters high and is actually dry for much of the year. Several tributaries also cut through the area, mostly running through the hills into what is known as the Thames Valley, eventually meeting with the Thames River itself. That'll run all the way to the Teddington Loch estuary, which will then bring us to the North Sea between the UK, Belgium, and the Nordic countries, as well as a few others. In addition to the North Sea, London is also relatively close to the English Channel, between England and France, couldn't have guessed that. And of course there's the Channel, an underground tunnel that is the only way to connect the country to the rest of Europe via car. No mountain ranges are really found near London. If you haven't noticed by now, much of the city is very flat and built heavily around water. However, there are several hills, including the Westerham Heights, which gives us the highest point of land in the capital at 245 meters. I'll also point out Parliament Hill, which is said to be the best way to get a view of the whole city from the outside. With all this in mind, London sees very little seismic activity, but it's not safe from natural disasters. Climate-wise, it's always had a reputation of being gray and cloudy and gloomy all the time. There's even a word coined for that came from here called smog, which is a combo of smoke and fog. It's only really predominantly warm or sunny in the summer months, of course, which doesn't last that long. However, the days are about 17 hours of daylight, and you're still going to find it raining from time to time. Most of the spring and fall are cool, and we'll see a lot of rain and clouds, and the winters are quite dry and usually only get about 7 hours of daylight. Snow is kind of rare as it hardly gets below freezing, however that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. I guess overall the way people think of London in terms of climate is pretty correct, and I didn't even mention pollution. Alright, so history. Where did all this begin? Well, it's said that hunter-gatherers inhabited the area as far back as 6000 BC. Bronze Age bridges and Iron Age forts have been found along the River Thames, so that's kind of our proof. However, talking about the city itself and the way we think of cities, it's largely agreed upon to be about 2,000 years old. It's estimated that it goes back to the year 43 AD when the Romans established this as a trading port known as Londinium. Now you may have noticed that the video is called The Big Smoke, and that's because London has a bit of a history of fires, burning it down and needing it to be rebuilt, and then burning it down again, and then rebuilding it again. In the year 60 AD, the Celtic queen Boudicca sacked and burnt the city, which was then rebuilt. But it was burnt again in 125 AD. But this rebuilding is what saw the population reach about 40,000 people. And within about 400 years, the Roman Empire fell, which meant all the attacks were pretty much done, right? In came the Vikings around 476 AD, and with the other raiders, they would continue this for centuries, including the Great Heathen Horde in East Anglia around 865, according to Anglo-Saxon chronicles. Actually, things really didn't start to look up till the 11th century. In 1066, the Battle of Hastings commenced, where two massive armies fought over the throne. King Harold, who had been crowned 9 months prior, faced off with Duke William of Normandy. About 7 miles from Hastings, William would end up the victor, and lots of blood was shed. Who would have guessed? He'd then go on to be known as William the Conqueror. The reason why this is so important is because it saw the end of the Anglo-Saxon king, and that kind of unified all of England, which then saw the building of the Westminster Abbey. You might also hear this all referred to as the Norman Conquest. Hey, then we see all sorts of other things being built after that, such as the Tower of London, and in 1176, the London Bridge was built out of stone for the first time because the wooden ones kept, wait for it, catching on fire. And obviously this would see London grow in size some more, and it would start to emerge as something significant on the world stage. It would be ruled by several different dynasties throughout this time, including the Plantagenets from the 12th to the 15th centuries. This is where the nation would suffer through the Black Death and then the 100 Years' War. It's called that because it spanned 100 years. Well, actually a little more, because it went from 1337 to 1453. This would be fought between England and France as the London throne tried to rule part of France through its English territories. Certainly wouldn't be the last time they tried to control different regions of the world, huh? Following this was the War of the Roses, where the House of York and Lancaster fought over London's throne from 1455 and 1485, and eventually we would reach the Tudor dynasty, leading us to the Henry VIII. By this time, London's population hit about 100,000, but more trouble. In comes Guy Fawkes, a Catholic sympathizer that tried to blow up the House of Parliament in what was known as the Gunpowder Plot. In 1665, the Great Plague would hit the city, and you can believe what happened next. The Great Fires of London! You see, most of the houses in this time were made of timber structures and flammable tar. A lot of stables were full of straw, and then to top it all off, a drought that lasted months made everything extra dry. But it all started thanks to this guy, Thomas Foreigner, when smoldering embers escaped his bakery, set the house on fire, and the lack of action by surrounding idle idiots, including the mayor, basically did nothing. Whoops. Rebuilding this, however, would see a lot of the famous buildings we see today be constructed, such as the Buckingham Palace and the St. Paul's Cathedral. By 1694, the Bank of England was founded here, and the whole nation would become an international powerhouse. Wonder how they managed to do that. And it wouldn't be long after that they would lose against the US in the US Revolution, so they would try to redraw European borders again to try to not lose more territory. How embarrassing. By 1840, the capital had reached a population of 2 million, and massive industrialization, close quarters housing, and really poor sanitary conditions spawned all sorts of, problems. By Queen Victoria's time, London was established as the seat of the vast British Empire, which also saw the London Underground open as the nation's first subterranean railway, as well as Big Ben. The late 19th century is when this notorious man, Jack the Ripper, emerged, and that takes us to the air raids of World War I that killed some 2,300 people. That seems like a lot, but World War II saw 30,000 casualties. This was due to the German Luftwaffe in what is known as the London Blitz. Now, you ready for some more pollution? The Great Smog of 1952 brought loads of suffering, and thousands died because of the pollution. This, and all the continued heavy industry and dank cities, is heavily considered to have shaped the attitude of the music scene in the coming decades, with darker and heavy tones credited to originate here. Because you know I had to mention that, right? And in 2012, the Olympics were hosted in London, cementing it as still being a cultural and financial center of Europe. Oh boy, that was a lot of history, but the wild thing is, I only really scratched the surface. But now let's take a look at London today and what it beholds. So you've heard me mention the London Bridge, the Westminster Abbey, St. Paul's Cathedral, Big Ben, and Buckingham's Palace, so I guess we'll start with all of those. The London Bridge actually refers to several bridges built throughout history since Roman times, and honestly, they're pretty self-explanatory. The Westminster Abbey, however, has been an important site since 1066, as I mentioned, and it's kind of the site reflecting England being united. Its Gothic looks are pretty impressive. Buckingham's Palace, however, is the home of the monarch, holding national royal celebrations, and it's where the changing of the guard ceremony takes place. Yes, you can take tours of this, including all the staterooms and the gardens. Surrounding this is also the Lancaster House, the Green Park, the Royal Mews, and St. James Park. Speaking of saints, St. Paul's Cathedral is just a skip away, being an Anglican cathedral that is the seat of the Bishop of London. It can date back to the original church on this site from 604 AD, and in the early 18th century, it was designed in the English Baroque style, following part of the rebuilding program after the Great Fire of London. We're all familiar with Big Ben, which is the nickname for the bell of the Great Clock of Westminster. It stands on the end of the Palace of Westminster, which is the home of the UK Parliament, as well as the House of the Lords, and it was once the feudal centre. Now, we can never forget the fact that there are loads of museums, with the most famous one being the British Museum with over 8 million stolen objects. Collections of works and artifacts from around the world since the beginning of time. There's also the Foundling Museum, the Postal Museum, Sherlock Holmes Museum, and of course the Imperial War Museum, which is heavily centered around the World Wars, as well as Winston Churchill's war rooms. Speaking of him, if you go way out into the hills outside of London, you'll find Winston Churchill's home, known as Chartwell. He bought this in 1922 and lived there until his death in 1965. Staying focused on the capital itself, let's look at some real tall buildings. The 20 French Church Street Sky Garden is a massive walkie-talkie shaped building that was completed as recently as 2014 with 34 floors and a viewing deck, restaurant, and bar. Nearby is the Gherkin, opening in 2004, which has 41 floors and is seen as one of London's greatest examples of contemporary architecture. Probably because it's kind of shaped like a, well. And in its shadows, don't miss the tiny St. Helens Bishopgate, a medieval building that stands as its largest surviving parish church. Yeah, you can never forget about all the cool medieval stuff under these giant structures. Actually, let's take a look at some of the medieval footprints. Close by would be the Tower of London, a historic castle on the north bank of the Thames River, lying with the London borough of Tower Hamlets. Founded in 1066 as part of the Norman Conquest, it was started by William the Conqueror in 1078 and was actually seen as a sign of repression by the ruling class at the time. It was also used as a prison from 1100 all the way to 1952, so yeah, I guess that's kind of fitting. Behind that, you can even see a small piece of London's wall. This dates way back to the Roman times when it was still the Londinium, which means that's roughly 2,000 years old. On the note of prisons, there's the Clink Prison Museum that operated from 1144 to 1780, housing all sorts of, we'll just say interactive features to accurately paint a picture of the dark history, in the form of a funhouse, of course. Do you like these colder subjects? Because we got a few more. In London, you'll find the St. Bartholomew's Hospital Pathology Museum, which is found in the oldest hospital in England. Continuing with other medieval sites, there's the Lost River Fleet, which predates the Anglo-Saxons, and it's been laid over with brick since the 18th century until rediscovery, where water still flowed beneath the infrastructure all this time. Looking out in the suburbs, you'll find the Crossbones Graveyard, which became known as the Single Women's Graveyard, as it's allegedly sex workers' graves. In other words, women who had a bad reputation with the Christian church back then didn't get a proper Christian burial, so they were kind of just dumped there. The Temple Church was consecrated in 1185, known for its very distinct round nave. When the Crusades started going poorly in the 13th century, the Knights of Templar were abandoned, and King Edward II used this for law education. Being a travel and transportation hub of the world, it's really no surprise that there are several airports. The two biggest ones would be London Heathrow and London Gatwick. Now, I already mentioned the London Underground, but unlike some countries, there are all sorts of public transit options. In fact, the London Bridge itself has its own train station, and there's also the Victoria and the St. Pancras International. Oh, how ironic. The most famous university in London is called Imperial College London. It's a three-way research institute around medicine, science, and engineering founded in 1907 when three other colleges merged. Let's take a look at some contemporary things and more obscure looks. Fans of Harry Potter and all those who romanticize absolutely everything about London are going to have a lot to be desired here. You can see platform 9 3/4 at King's Cross Station, as well as the Leadenhall Market, being a Victorian marketplace where Diagon Alley and the Leaky Cauldron were set. As a matter of fact, there's an entire Warner Bros. Studio tour that one can take, and at Christmas time there's a huge glowing light tour that can be taken by bus. I think we've all seen this thing before, and this is called the London Eye. It's 135 meters in diameter, being the largest cantilevered observation wheel. Don't call it a Ferris wheel, as it's anchored to only one A-frame. It gives people a 360-degree view over the Thames River, and construction for this started in 1998, opening in 2000. Looking at other more obscure stops, we have God's Own Junkyard, which is a warehouse maze made entirely of neon signs, and similarly there's a tree made up entirely of traffic lights, a nightmare for those that drive stoned. If you're seeking more spooky settings, you can find the Kensal Green Cemetery and the Catacombs, being the oldest one in the city. Or perhaps tread into the Highgate Cemetery, which was once the site of dueling magicians and vampire hunters. Oh, and Karl Marx's gravesite can also be found here. Maybe you prefer a haunted house. You can see the London Dungeon, which has all sorts of local history, much of it being very gruesome. Moving over to a place called the Guildhall's Yard, there's a Roman amphitheater that lies under it, which is of course about 2,000 years old. Now, obviously there's going to be a huge amount of pubs and restaurants, so I'm just going to highlight a couple of them that stood out to me. For one, there's the Mayflower Pub, which is situated right where the actual Mayflower was moored before it took to the Americas. Or if you'd like to see the oldest pub on the River Thames, there's the Prospect of Whitby. In East London, one will find the 10 Bells Pub, with authentic Victorian tiling and some history related to Jack the Ripper. Parks are obviously a big part of huge walkable cities like this. I think a neat one is the real Greenwich Prime Meridian Park, which the true Prime Meridian runs through and ultimately is where we decide our time zone across the whole world. One of the largest would be the 350-acre Hyde Park, one of the many that acts as a chain of green areas connecting the main historical sites in Kensington. Others include Battersea, Regent's Park, and Holland Park. I already touched on the music scene a little bit, but honestly, so many musicians came from London that we all have heard of before. This includes the Rolling Stones, Queen, Led Zeppelin, The Clash, Pink Floyd, the Sex Pistols, Iron Maiden, Motorhead, Rod Stewart, the Pet Shop Boys, and of course, One Direction. Obviously, Harry Potter was shot in London, but other films including Love Actuality, A Clockwork Orange, and Mary Poppins were filmed here too. Everybody's favorite playmaster William Shakespeare hailed from London, as well as other famous writers like John Keats, Lord Byron, and William Blake. In terms of events, there's a lot going on in London, perhaps the Notting Hill Carnival being one of the largest. This is actually the biggest celebration of Caribbean culture in all of Europe, and they host the large celebrations of the Chinese New Year's outside of Asia. Don't forget, they're also one of the cities that hosts a marathon, as well as a boat race between Oxford and Cambridge. It's been running since 1829, and there are always music festivals including Wireless and Download. I'm sure there's other stuff I overlooked, and I'm sure you're going to tell me about it in the comments, which would be cool, but I believe this is going on as long as it needs to. London is a massive city, and it has so many neighborhoods. I make a lot of jokes about this country and, well, West Europe as a whole, but honestly, I'd truly love to visit London someday. Thank you for taking this adventure with me as always. What do you think of London? I'd be super appreciative if you left a comment, or if you subscribed, liked, or shared. Cheerio!